Yeah.
Okay. In case you wonder, my background, I just been to there. It's called the Guilin. It's a beautiful area with a lot of like a small
Ah,
mountains. So yeah, it's a different kind
mm.
of landscape than you normally see. It's a very mountainous area, but it's like not very high mountain, but just huge area of different mountains.
My brother-in-law has been to Guilin and loves it very
Okay.
much. Anyway, carry
Yeah.
on, carry on.
Yeah, it's a famous place, and Hillary Clinton mentioned that in her book when she and her husband visited China.
Mm.
That's the one area they visited. But when they did back then, I think they not as well developed in terms of tourist industry as it is now. So it's very, I mean,
Mm.
it's very touristy. So, but anyway,
Mm. Yeah.
all right.
Just to say something very quickly, very, very briefly, I have
Uh-huh.
heaps of guidebooks about China up there,
Uh-huh.
which some of which I bought in the late 1980s when I had and 90s when I had plans to visit China, which alas didn't happen. I was actually learning Chinese at that time and enjoying it and making good progress, but um, things would just things became too complicated in my life. But anyway, a couple of years ago, Catherine went to China with some of these guidebooks,
Okay.
and she found that everything since then had changed completely because, of course, the
Yeah.
China of that period of the 80s
Uh-huh.
and early 90s was a completely different place. In technology and economics and industry and modernity from the China that she saw some years ago. So there we go.
Yeah. It is, I mean, even for Chinese, if you don't visit the places, like even in Beijing, for me, every time I
Mm,
visit, it's just a lot of
yeah,
things happening and
mm,
lots of things that I'm not familiar with.
yeah,
And so yeah,
yeah,
it's a country that
yeah.
I'm learning also. Okay.
Of course, and one will always learn about because, as I said, it is so interesting and so enormous.
So okay, let's look at the second term of the Trump administration. So first of all, what do you think it's
Mm.
going to be different or more or less the same as the Trump's first administration? What do you expect the second term is going to be overall?
I think it is. I think it is going to be at least what Trump wants it to be is profoundly different. I think he became president in 2016, or was elected president in 2016, unexpectedly. He hadn't really expected that he was going to win. He didn't have a team. He went to the leaders of the Republican Party. They basically picked his administration for him. He ended up with very establishment people that he didn't get on with and didn't find reliable,
Mhm.
and he's determined not to make that mistake a second time. So he's now picking all kinds of extraordinary people completely outside the standard political class to pack his administration. And I'm going to say this he, I think, is most interested in winning the political battle that he wants to wage in Washington. In other words, to break the power of the forces that defeated him in his first term. And that's why he's picking the people that he is picking.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, these people tend to be very, very right wing,
Yeah.
very much people of the grassroots
Mhm.
in other Republican Party, Tea Party people. And um, though they are very loyal to Trump and
Mhm.
will probably support him in fighting these various, four-letter agents and all of those things in Washington itself. They also have views on China and Iran,
Mhm. Mhm.
which I find extremely concerning. So I think that's the trouble. I don't think he's. I think he's principally focused on Washington. But for China and Iran, this is going to be a very, very difficult time, though I think China is going to be able to navigate this problem quite successfully.
Yeah, as you can imagine, all his nominees are closely watched in China, of course. So let's start with Marco Rubio. I have to say, I was surprised when they picked
Yeah.
Marco Rubio. I don't feel like he has much of a depth or experience. But in China, here's how they explain. I mean, some people on X also pointed out the reason he picked Marco Rubio was because Marco Rubio was very much backed by the Adelson money, Adelson family. They seem to strongly supported him from the beginning when he first time run for president. And certainly he didn't, obviously he didn't win. So Adelson shifted their support to Trump. But they has always been supporting Marco Rubio. Seems like that's their guy. And so now they push him forward, having, been given Trump $100 million or something. So now they push him forward, I guess, because they probably want to see him to succeed Trump in a way or something. So that's how he got this position, Secretary of State. But in any event, this clearly is, to me, is a big disappointment because Marco Rubio is very anti-China. And not to mention, he's on the sanctions list by the Chinese government, which means in principle, he cannot go to China for now. What do you say about, the situation here?
I think that is exactly correct. I think he's a bad choice for Secretary of State. I mean, I absolutely would not have wanted him as Secretary of State in any conceivable shape or form. By the way, I also think that Mike Waltz, who's the new National Security Advisor, he also seems to have very disturbing views about China. I think you're absolutely right. I think the Chinese are absolutely right about Marco Rubio. He's very much the kind of person the donors wanted to see, the establishment wants to see. And for that reason, especially given the very, very eccentric, or shall we say, unusual choice of other people to fill other positions in the Department of Justice, in the intelligence community, in those sort of places, I think that Trump probably felt that he had to pick someone acceptable to the donors and to the establishment in order to cover his base, cover his positions, at least to some extent. But the problem with that is that you're going to put Rubio in charge of the State Department. I don't think he's going to change his views. I don't think he's incapable of changing his views. He's going to be as ferociously anti-China as it's possible to be. He's going to be as supportive of Taiwan as it's possible to be. And if Trump isn't very careful, he's going to lead Trump and the United States into many, many problems. So I think it was a bad choice. I think it's one that Trump is going to pay a price for.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, more or less the Chinese media agrees. His national security advisor pick is also a China hawk, Michael Waltz, and also the Homeland Security pick, Kristi Noem. Kristi Noem is very famous in China because she had one interview with Maria Bartiromo. She was talking. She said that China has 2,000-year plan to destroy this country, meaning United States. She has that. So that footage, was for a while, was all over the place in China.
What 2,000 years going back to the Han Dynasty? they were plotting it then. They are very, very prescient people, the Chinese. Or is it 2,000 years from now? I mean, it seems the most extraordinary. I have to say that's one of the most surreal things I have ever heard. It demonstrates the level of paranoia that exists in the United States. That a comment like that could possibly be made. I mean, that astonishes me. But there we go. No, but there you go. I mean, that is the trouble. All of these people, there's a kind of folk wisdom on the folk. It's not wisdom, of course. A folk sort of law on the far right, on the kind of people, as I said, who Trump is appointing because they have been his core electoral base and he feels that they're loyal to him. The problem is that all of these people, I mean, they have this absolutely crazy view, in my opinion, of China. I mean, they think that they do see China in these extraordinary terms. And as I said, all of these people, Trump may be appointing them because he wants their loyalty in taking on the bureaucracy in Washington, but unfortunately they come with all this baggage, and they believe in all of this. I mean, that's the trouble, and they're going to lead him, as I said, they potentially are going to lead him into many problems.
Yeah. One place I was looking at is, of course, Israel, the Middle East policies. So on top of the people he picked, Marco Rubio openly said he doesn't believe in like a two-state solution. He doesn't want a ceasefire. He said that. And on top of that, Mike Huckabee was the U.S. ambassador to Israel. Again, does not believe in two-state solution. And Elisa Stefanik, UN ambassador to U.S. ambassador to UN, she's a staunch supporter of Israel, a Zionist, etc. So all these people, on top of the fact that are very hawkish against China, they seems also very hawkish in terms of the Israel Middle East policy. Is that so?
Oh, there's no doubt about this at all. And here, by the way, I'm afraid I think they also reflect Trump's own feelings. I mean, he has always been very pro-Israel. Netanyahu has been his personal friend. I remember seeing photographs of Trump's office in Trump Tower, and it was full of Jewish and Israeli there was the candlestick and all of those things there. He clearly has a very strong identification with Israel, and I think, I mean, I said all of these other people, I think some of them he's picking in order to fight internal battles in Washington. But that doesn't apply to Huckabee or Stefanik. She's at the UN. He's going to be in Jerusalem. They're not there to fight the bureaucracy in Washington. They are there to pursue his policies, which are going to be extremely pro-Israel at this very dangerous time in the Middle East. And again, I don't know whether Trump understands that, but this could potentially lead him into a war in the Middle East against Iran, and he was going to find that war an absolute disaster for himself if he lets that happen. But I think that there is a real possibility that he will. I think on China, he might just pull back. But on the Middle East, I'm much. I mean, as I said, I think his visceral feelings are very clear on this issue.
So, do you think it's possible that the U.S. will get into a war with Iran? Because that's ultimately many of these people want. They do want to have a war with Iran.
Yeah.
Do you think with Trump,
absolutely,
they will get that?
Yes, I do. And I'll tell you something else. Another thing that is very visible here is that a lot of the people that are rising now at the new defense secretary, whose name Hexeth, or I can never get it right, Hegseth, Mike Waltz, by the way, Gabbard as well. They are all former middle-ranking military officers who have served in the Middle East. And this applies to Gabbard as well, by the way. What they all are is, yes, they are against forever wars and that kind of thing, because they saw the effect of that. They're also very hostile to Islamic movements, jihadist movements. And they conflate those movements to a great extent with Iran, which is a real problem. I mean, they've never really understood that Iran is not allied to these movements, but is opposed to them. And of course, those who served in Iraq will have come up against the Iranians there, because the Iranians were very active and are very active in Iran to this day. And they've developed from that a further feeling of hostility and rivalry towards Iran. So I'm sorry to say this, but I think that there's a real possibility that these people are going to agitate to back Israel in a confrontation, a military confrontation with Iran, which will be a disaster.
See, I I have to say I'm disappointed because maybe I shouldn't be expecting so much because I agree with you. I think his second term will be different from his first term. I think he's
Mm, mm,
matured a lot over the past, I would say, 4 years in
mm.
particular. I think he's more confident. And I do believe he's a person actually do not want to have wars with everybody. And in that case, I
Yeah.
was thinking that he would have some mild, people who are more soft on all these fronts. But seems to me like the only country, the only war they are against, it seems like is Ukraine war. That seems like where he's going to find a
That's
solution. He's going to try to find a solution to end it. But in terms of in the Middle East and with China, and possibly, I don't know, Marco Rubio is very much against Venezuela as well in South America.
yeah.
So it seems all other places, it's going to be the same old, same old. Is that what's going to happen?
That is exactly what I think is the danger, and I would not be surprised at all if that is exactly what we ended up seeing. Um, now, again, Trump has matured, and he has become an awful lot more experienced, and he's learned that in Washington, loyalty is a very important thing. But he's going for ultra loyalists who, as I said, come with all these views.
Yeah.
And this is so disappointing because there are so many other people in the United States who would help him stabilize the international system. And you could find lots of people like that, people who are eminent and reasonable and wise. On the Duran, we recently interviewed George Beebe, who was a former top CIA analyst. He also thinks that the Ukraine thing has been horribly mishandled. He
Yeah.
understands that the United States is overextended. There's people like Eldridge Colby, who was formerly in the Pentagon. We've discussed Professor Mearsheimer on
Mhm.
many occasions, who could certainly be somebody. You wouldn't appoint him to the administration, but you could seek him out and get advice from him. You could find all kinds of people like that. And unfortunately, what has happened is that Trump has gone against the establishment neocons, which is the people he ran with in his first term, and he's now going with the anti-establishment neocons, even though they're also neocons. In fact, they're even more extreme neocons than the other ones. And of course, you're quite right. They have a kind of soft spot for Russia. They
Yeah.
don't have the same animus towards Russia
Mhm.
that the established neocons do. Because, and I'm going to say it bluntly, I'm going to say this to your Chinese viewers, because Russia is a white Christian
Yeah.
country.
Yeah.
I think that is the fundamental difference. But, you know, one can applaud the result in the sense that we're likely to see less of a war in Ukraine. Uh, but unfortunately, they're incredibly dangerous in every other place.
Well, regarding Ukraine, what do you think Biden will do during the remainder of his administration, remainder of his time in the White House? One thing I noticed that the Blinken pushed really for more aid and more this and that. Seems like they want to give as much as possible during that time, that limited time, about 2 months, so that Ukraine can last as long as possible. Is that what they're doing for the remainder of the time?
That is exactly what they're doing. I don't think we need to guess here because we can see it. I mean, the administration is sending as many weapons as it can to Ukraine. It's engaging in further creative accounting to extend the reach of the dollars that they were um, given in the appropriation that Congress passed back in April. So they're going to send even more weapons to Ukraine. They're going to shovel more money to Ukraine. They're going to try and keep the Ukraine conflict going for as long as they can.
Mhm.
They're going to try to get the Europeans to go on supporting Ukraine. And there are two reasons for this. Reason one, which is the immediate political pressing one, they do not want to see a Ukrainian collapse while Joe Biden is still president. They want if there's going to be a Ukrainian collapse, they want it to happen sometime after Joe Biden has ceased to be president, so they can blame it on Donald Trump. So that's one thing that they're doing. The other thing is that, of course, they still have an emotional commitment to this project. This sense that this is still, the battle between light and darkness, good and evil, and they feel that they must go on giving every support that they can to the forces of good. So, that is what they're going to do. And I don't have any doubt about that at all.
Well, with that, what do you think is the Ukrainian government, Zelensky, going to do? I mean, are they going to, at some point, to really sit down to talk to Russia and get some solution, or they will just keep on fighting even without the full support from the US? What is Ukraine going to do?
I think that, again, I think we can already see the contours of what Zelensky is trying to do. Now, remember, he's becoming an increasingly desperate man. The military situation is turning terrible. It's getting worse and worse. It's deteriorated significantly, even in the last 24 hours, by the way, just before we did this program. And of course, he sees in Donald Trump somebody who gives every indication of wanting to get away from this problem of Ukraine, which he does understand as a businessman, former businessman, is a bad investment. I mean, I'm sure that's how he sees it primarily. So Zelensky sees that. So he's trying to do two things. Firstly, he's setting his face against negotiations. I think he understands perfectly well that any negotiation process with the Russians is going to end in a bad outcome for him personally. So he wants to prevent that. He's coming up with all kinds of schemes to maneuver the Russians into positions where they appear to reject negotiations. So he talks about mutual cessation of attacks on the energy systems and things of that kind, things that he knows the Russians will say no to. So he's doing that. He does not want negotiations. He wants the war to go on. He needs more weapons. So he's coming to Europe and telling the Europeans, give me more weapons, bring me into NATO as quickly as possible. He's probably hoping that the new chancellor in Germany, Friedrich Merz, is going to be an ally, and he's probably right about that. And at the same time, he's trying to blackmail Donald Trump by floating this idea that if the Americans cut off aid, Ukraine will go and move to develop nuclear weapons. So apparently he said that to Trump in September. He then floated it again about 2 weeks ago after he did the speech, the victory plan speech. And yesterday we had an article in the London Times based on a briefing paper that is circulating in Kiev, telling us that Ukraine could acquire nuclear weapons in a few months if the Americans stop giving aid. So what he's going to try and do is he's going to try and blackmail Trump. He's going to say to Trump, look, give me everything I want, because if you don't, then I will go nuclear and it'll be a nuclear war, and that will be very, very bad for everybody. So that's his strategy. It's a very desperate strategy, but he is a very desperate man.
Okay, but that will make him dangerous, though. I mean, on top of the fact that I don't think nuclear is a real thing. It's just a blackmail. He's just saying it, but he could have done some other things, which we don't know yet, right? Who knows what things they will come up with that will be dangerous. I just feel like he will be more and more dangerous because he's so desperate. That's how I feel.
Even floating this idea.
Yeah.
However, I mean, by the way, I've had discussions with people. They all tell me that what Zelensky and his people are saying about nuclear weapons is impossible. That yes, Ukraine does have the technology and the people to build nuclear weapons and could probably acquire the raw materials as well. But this is a project of several years. It certainly can't be done in a few months, and it would be a huge industrial undertaking, and the Russians would quickly figure out that it's happening, and so would the Americans and everyone else. So this is a bluff. It is nonsense, but it is a very, very stupid thing to be going around telling people, because Donald Trump, I am sure, is going to be saying to himself after he hears all this that this man is not somebody I want to have anything to do with. I mean, he's trying to blackmail me and trying to blackmail me in this kind of way. But it is not uncharacteristic of Zelensky. I mean, it is very much how he conducts diplomacy. I mean, we've had the situation with China. I mean, remember when Li Hui went to Kiev a couple of months ago and the Ukrainians were so rude to him there? And we said at the time this made absolutely no sense for the Ukrainians to do. But that is the kind of government and leader that Ukraine has at this time.
Now, one thing they talked about, which I think you talked about that on the Duran show, is that somehow there's a plan, the Trump's plan that Ukraine will promise not to join NATO for 20 years, and then they establish some kind of a demilitarization zone, something like that, which you talked about on the Duran, saying that's not plausible for either side to accept, which I agree. But I do want to ask you about what does non-militarization zone means? What does that mean if you are going to establish something? What does that mean?
It's a very, very good question. I'm going to say something, Sophia. You are probably the only person to ask that question, because there is no answer to it. I don't think anybody knows. It's probably derived from the the zone in between the two Koreas. But the point about that zone, and I've been there, by the way, I've actually looked over it. I mean, nobody basically lives there. So I mean, and it's basically a narrow belt of territory. I mean, unacceptable to the Russians, impossible for Ukraine. It's a ridiculous idea. No one should take that idea seriously. But they come up, they talk about buffer zones and those kind of zones. And as I said, nobody really spells out what that means, because it doesn't actually mean anything.
Yeah, if you look at the Korea situation, which is interesting for you to bring it up, but because my understanding is it's called a non-militarization zone, but it's actually heavily militarized. They're from both sides. They are soldiers. Yeah. So that's kind of interesting to me.
I've been there, as I said. I've been on there.
Yeah.
I've been there from the South Korean side. That is exactly what it is. It is a very, very tense and rather frightening place, actually, if I have to say.
And in terms of Korea, the Korean War never officially ended, right? So it's a pause or truce or however you want to call it. So it's not really, they never had a peace agreement. So that's why it's kind of like in the freeze. The war is frozen. Is that's a model that they're thinking somehow could apply to the Korean, the Ukraine situation? Is that what they're thinking? Freeze it.
That is exactly what they think. By the way, about the Korean War, I mean, it's what's called an armistice. It was intended to be a temporary cessation of hostilities on the conflict line. And then the idea was that there would be negotiations that would shortly follow. And the plan, the stated purpose was to come to a long-term resolution of the whole conflict, which would have presumably involved a reunited Korea. But of course, that never happened, because the Western powers, and one really needs to say it again, it was the Western powers. They didn't want it. They did exactly the same with Vietnam, by the way. There was a conference in Geneva. It agreed a ceasefire. This is at the time when the French was fighting the Vietnamese. This was in 1954. There was supposed to be further negotiations leading to elections in 1958 across the whole of Vietnam, which, of course, everybody knew that the Communist Party and Ho Chi Minh would win, and for that reason, that never happened. So what is being proposed is a freeze, which is really creating this terrible line across Ukraine. I mean, the Ukrainians are right, by the way, not to want this. And of course, it is unacceptable to the Russians as well, because it doesn't resolve the problem. It prolongs the conflict. It extends it indefinitely. And the Russians have made it very clear repeatedly that what they want is a permanent, sustained peace on their western borders, not a situation where a conflict continues indefinitely.
Well, then what, in your view, what is a plausible, a possible solution though? Because the Ukrainians will say will not surrender, and the Russian, I mean, so in that case, how can we have a quick like stop for the war? Can we have one? Is my
Right.
question.
The way to achieve a quick end to the fighting actually has been set out. It was set out by Putin back in January. The Ukrainians pull all their troops out of the four regions, the four territories which the Russians say belong to them, and of course Crimea as well. Not that there are any Ukrainian troops in Crimea, but they pull out of these four regions, that there can then be a ceasefire, and that Ukraine recommits itself to implementing all of the provisions of the Istanbul Agreement, the draft agreement that was reached in Istanbul in April 2022. The problem is that all of that now is completely unacceptable to Ukraine, because if we have that outcome, not only will Ukraine lose the four regions and Crimea itself, but Ukraine would be comprehensively reorganized in a way that would make it a completely different country from the one we have now, because it required the Istanbul provisions required, free speaking of the Russian language, teaching of Russian in schools, protection for the Russian Orthodox Church, for the extinguishing of people with, these radical fascistic neo-Nazi ideologies, who are, of course, organized in large militias. It is impossible to see any government in Kiev today agreeing to what was almost agreed in Istanbul back in April of 2022.
So, to be clear, so far, Trump himself hasn't said anything about his plan, right? All these non-military zones and, this and that, they are all coming from the people familiar with the matter or whoever. But there's a lot of smoke going on, including in the Chinese social media, because it's not clear, where the sources are for all these things. But Trump himself has never said anything, right, about his plan, right? So we don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
He doesn't have one. I think that's the thing people need to understand. Donald Trump has no plan about how to end the Ukraine war. There are all kinds of people who are proposing plans to him, but he has never accepted any of them. He never says no, but he doesn't say yes either. He has all these plans floating around, but I mean, he's just done a speech in Mar-a-Lago. What he seems to want, what he's saying should happen, is that the Ukrainians and the Russians should sit down and talk to each other. And that seems to be the full extent of of what he's prepared to do. That's what he wants to happen. The Ukrainians won't. The Russians won't. And then, of course, when that happens, I suspect he's going to cut off further financial and military aid.
Okay. Switch gear. APEC. So APEC is going on right now, and Xi Jinping and Biden is going to meet tomorrow. Are we going to expect anything, or this is just a courtesy meeting before Biden leaves office? Anything will happen at all significant tomorrow?
No, I don't think anything. I don't think this is going to take us forward in any way, because in terms of the long term, because obviously Biden isn't going to be president beyond the 20th of January.
Mm-hmm.
And then Xi Jinping has to deal with Donald Trump, who he knows well, of course. It's always important to remember. And Xi Jinping knows that Biden cannot bind Trump. So that limits the level of interaction. But it's not going to be just a courtesy visit because, of course, Biden might do things during the remaining time that he is president. There's already been a delivery of HIMARS missiles, for example, to Taiwan. Xi Jinping will want to make absolutely clear to Joe Biden that any further arms deliveries or moves in that respect are not going to be looked upon favorably by China, and that China will respond to them. Because it's important to remember that Biden is still there. He's still got about 2 months, and a lot can be done in a very bad way in 2 months. So I think that is the concern that the Chinese have, that they want to limit, they want to get Biden not to do anything reckless or stupid in that time.
Yeah. By the way, in mainland, lots of people like Trump better than they like Harris. Is because for some reason, the Taiwan authorities somehow they bet on Harris will win. Okay, they just don't like Trump because I think last time Trump did say, well, the tip of his pan is Taiwan, and then the big table in front of him is mainland, which he meant was, the two sides there is not even comparable in terms of their significance and to deal with from the U.S. perspective. And that really, I think, made lots of the authorities in Taiwan very unhappy. And I think ever since then, they just never liked Trump. And so I guess they somehow believed Harris will win, and then they bet on her. So that's, I think, part of the reason I think some people in mainland, although fundamentally, I don't think Trump's policy will change much. And the difference between him and Biden is he's more straightforward. He will be more open, not just say things and then turn around do something else. But he will still confront China in all kinds of ways, right?
Yeah, that is exactly right. But the last is not. Its importance should not be overlooked, because dealing with a straightforward adversary can be difficult and challenging, but it is always better than dealing with a dishonest one. I think what made the whole relationship between China and the United States so poisonous during the time of the Biden administration is that Blinken, Sullivan, and especially Biden himself continuously lied. I mean, they were lying to China all the time. They were lying about the one China policy. They were lying about everything you can possibly imagine. And as we've discussed in several programs, Xi Jinping basically pointed that out. And most recently, in the meeting with Blinken, so did Wang Yi. He said, "You're being two-faced." So I think that there's a very famous diplomatic textbook from the early 18th century, written by a French diplomat at that time. And he said in it, never lie. As a diplomat should never lie, because if you do lie, you might gain some temporary advantage, but you will leave poison behind you. And this is something that the Biden people never understood. They never stop lying. Now, with Trump, I think it's different in that, of course, he changes his mind and he's not always consistent. But I don't think he goes out of his way to deceive in the same way. And precisely because he is transactional. And I know that he wants an all-out war with China. And his vice president, J.D. Vance, definitely doesn't. I think that Xi Jinping can explain things to him. He could say, look, it is absolutely not in your interests to get into a conflict with us. Taiwan is an absolute red line. We're not, they've said, the Chinese have said this many, many times. It turns up now repeatedly in the readouts that they have with American officials. Taiwan is an absolute red line. You must respect that. We understand that we will have conflicts and disagreements on many other things, but don't think you can cross our red lines and that there won't be consequences. And I think Trump, for all that he's surrounded himself with all of these crazy people, understands that. And I think some of them understand it too. Being military people, they probably do understand it.
The other thing the Chinese media talk about is that the possibility of Trump will try to, or people inside the Trump administration will try to ease the relationship with Russia and get along with Putin so that they can divide Russia and China. I mean, this has been talked in the past, but now it seems like since more and more people, more people within the Trump administration talking about ending the war in Ukraine, so this seems like a more likely, people think it is more likely to happen. What is your view on that?
Right. Well, I mean, there's been a whole sort of current. I mean, Steve Bannon used to talk about this, that what we've got to do is to find ways to unpick China from Russia, from China. Trump has talked about this also. Now, there's a couple of days ago, there was this big conference in Sochi, in Russia. The Valdai conference, and Putin spoke for 4.5 hours, by the way, both a speech and a Q&A. And he was asked precisely this thing. He was asked it by a Chinese journalist, in fact, 2 Chinese journalists. He was asked this by a Japanese journalist as well. They asked him, if the Americans come along and give you some kind of big offer, will you go with it and turn on us? And the Japanese said, well, why, if we come along and give you an offer, will you start to shift away from China? And Putin went out of his way to say, this is impossible. Our relationship with China has never been as strong and has never been better. We are not going to jeopardize it because we have these proposals and offers from the Americans that we cannot trust. Now, I should say, just a few minutes before we started this program, I was doing another program with a Russian journalist called Fyodor Lukyanov, who was actually there. He was moderating the whole discussion at which Putin made these very comments. And Lukyanov, who is not he knows Putin, obviously. Though, as I said, he's careful to say he's not official of the Russian government. But he said it very simply. He said, no one in Moscow is so stupid that they're going to put at risk a relationship with China, this extremely powerful country, on Russia's southern border in return for promises from a faraway country, the United States, that has shown repeatedly that its attitude to Russia is hostile. He said this would be idiocy to do. And I think, people in China need to understand that. I mean, quite apart from the fact that Russians generally have now developed a very positive view about China. And certainly at the level, if you go there, the level of, the ordinary people that you meet on the streets and places like that, that is very strong. I mean, they're very, very pro-China now. But it's even extended now to elite people. I mean, the more interactions they've had with China, the more they've come to appreciate the connection with China. So there is that feeling as well. But beyond that, there is this underlying understanding that a good, friendly, strong relationship with China is absolutely in Russia's national interests. And no one in Russia is going to compromise on this.
Yeah, I agree. Okay. How about the Europeans? Let's start first. The German government collapsed right? The
Mm.
so-called the traffic light government that
Mm.
hold them together, but now they are not holding together. What happened and what's going to happen? Explain to
Yeah.
my audience.
I mean, briefly, I mean, the
Mhm,
Traffic Light Coalition came in with a very ambitious program to reorganize Germany and to take it in a more green direction. And they then went ahead and plunged into Atlanticist policies of extreme confrontation with the Russians and growing hostility to China, which have proved economically disastrous and have undermined the entire policy, the entire objectives, domestic objectives of the coalition, because what they're now presiding over is a severe economic crisis in Germany. I mean, factories are closing. Volkswagen is talking about closing 3 of its factories. Other factories are closing. There's been a continuous industrial contraction in Germany, which has now been underway constantly for the last 3 years. Um,
mhm,
and Germany is in a very, very difficult position economically, and people's living standards are falling, and people in Germany are worried, and the popularity of the coalition has collapsed. And the result is that the various parties in the coalition have been looking for ways to escape it because they sense that they are part of an enterprise, a traffic
mhm,
light coalition government that has failed. So they all want to leave the coalition and do so in ways that they will blame each other. Now, what is fascinating is that, of course, the topic that they all chose to argue about and which led to the collapse of the coalition was the issue of funding for Ukraine. Germany has a budget crisis. It's got a 9 billion euro hole in its budget. There is a constitutional amendment. There is a constitutional provision in Germany which requires Germany to maintain a balanced budget over a certain time frame. So they've also, however, simultaneously made commitments through the G7 to provide more loan funding to Ukraine, significant loan funding. And in order to do that, they would have to enlarge the deficit. So the 2 of the parties of the coalition, the Social Democrats and the Greens, said to the finance minister, who comes from the third party, the Free Democrats, uh, relax this rule, let us
mhm.
borrow even more, let us then use the money that we borrowed, run an even bigger deficit, and use that to support Ukraine. And he said no. He said, I'm not prepared to do that. I'm not prepared to provide funding to Ukraine in that way. I
Mhm.
absolutely support Ukraine. The best way to support Ukraine is by giving them more weapons, long range weapons and missiles, so they can strike at Russia instead. So that wasn't acceptable to the 2 other parties, the Social Democrats and the Greens, and it was the issue that they chose to end the coalition over. It's all theatre, it's performance politics. I mean, nobody really takes this all seriously. What it is the Free Democrats want to pose as the party of financial discipline
Mhm.
and budgetary rectitude, which is something that Germans care an awful lot about. The Social Democrats want to pose as the party of peace, and the Free Democrats the Greens can't stand the Free Democrats anyway, because the Greens have a completely different objective, which is to press forward as quickly as possible towards, renewables and all of those things, but to do so without getting help from China, because China is the only country that can do that, and the Greens don't like China at the same time. So this is why this whole thing has fallen apart, because ultimately its whole policy direction since February 2022 has been a disaster,
Mhm.
and they're all trying to find means to blame each other.
Yeah. By the way, when you bring it up that the Greens refuse to work with China to do the environmental friendly thing, it's actually reaffirmed China's belief. Many Chinese believe this whole thing, this environmental thing, is to throw it out there to limit China and other global South countries from developing. That's lots of people believe that's what it is. It has nothing to do with the environment. They just use that to stop, or slow down other countries from developing. That's
That is exactly true. They're completely right. I mean, they do want to move forward with various technologies, but they want to do that themselves. They don't want other countries like China, especially, doing it instead. And every day, I get sort of horrified comments. I was talking to somebody in the actually British car industry, but works for Volkswagen, about the horror about the fact that Chinese EVs are so good. I mean, this is absolutely terrifying thing. We can't possibly have these really, really good, very efficient, well-run EVs. He even said to me, they don't even catch fire. I mean, he thinks. I mean, I am not making that up. That is actually what he said.
That's a terrible thing. It doesn't catch fire.
That's a
Okay.
terrible thing. Exactly. Yeah.
And actually, a few years ago, there was an interview conducted by somebody interviewed someone in the government talking about this. And he actually flatly said, I would just predict that all those promises the Western country made about what they're going to achieve, they are going to backtrack them. And that's exactly what happened. They promised they're going to, net zero. I mean, those kind of, air pollution or whatever the measurement they put in place by this year, by that year, they all backtrack them. So that's exactly what. So that person was correct from the government. Yeah.
The only country that has really moved forward successfully, and I'm going to say technologically and industrially, is China itself. And by the way, that will position China better in the end, because these are the technologies of the future. I mean, you're putting aside climate issue, electrification is a good thing, just to say.
Yeah. And then, solar panels, and that's another problem that people are saying, okay, China produced so many, solar panels, it's over capacity. Again, it doesn't make much sense. We should all celebrating, right? That now solar panel is much, much cheaper than it used to. We should all very happy celebrate. But no, that's a problem. It's just incredible.
Yeah.
But what's going to happen in Germany next? Are they going to have an early election?
Yes, they're going to have early elections because of the structure of the German political system and the history of the German political system. We are more likely than not, going to end up with the Christian Democrats returning to power, led by Friedrich Merz. Merz is more of the same. I mean, he does have ideas about reviving the German economy, which basically are taking a more free market-led tax cutting approach, which, in my opinion, doesn't remotely address Germany's actual problems. He's very hostile to Russia. He's very hostile to China. The point I have made about Merz is that he's a throwback to the German politics of the 50s and early 60s, the time of Konrad Adenauer, when German policy at that time, was very, very much based upon a very free market approach to the German economy and extreme hostility to the Russians and the Chinese, and extreme anti-communism as well. A set of policies and a mindset which even many Germans are saying, is completely out of date. So he's going to come in, he's going to become chancellor. The CDU is expected to get around 30 to 32% of the vote. It might get less, it might get a bit more. It's not enough for a majority. It's going to need a coalition partner. That might be the Free Democrats, but it's unlikely the Free Democrats will win enough votes to give the CDU a majority. The most likely outcome because it's inconceivable to my mind that Mao's can agree a coalition with the Greens. I mean, the politics is so different that we're going to end up with a grand coalition with the Social Democrats again. So maybe the CDU, the SPD, and the Free Democrats coming together in a coalition with a government which basically ultimately is not going to be that different in its external policies to the current one. And it'll do things like cut taxes and deregulate and do those sort of things. But it'll be, as I put it in a recent program, it'll be a case of rearranging the deck chairs on the sinking ship. I mean, that's what it's going to be.
So they're not going to work with the Sarah Wagner or AfD. They're not going to work with any of those sensible people.
No. There is a possibility. I mean, there's some polls that suggest that the AfD and Sarah Wagenknecht might get as many as a third of the seats in the forthcoming German parliament. But that's going to make the establishment parties even more determined to work together to keep these groups out. We will eventually see change in Germany, but it's going to take time. I'm afraid we have to go through the period of the Merz-led CDU government for that to happen. Lots of people in Germany can see that this whole course is wrong. But older people will continue to vote for the parties they know. They'll be very suspicious of these other parties. Germany is very slow to change political course. It's that kind of society. So I'm afraid we've still got at least 4 or 5 years before we start to see any major change in Germany. And I'm afraid the Germans are going to pay the price for that.
Okay. Coming back to the U.S. Election, now it's clear we can tell who the winners are, right? The Republican Party and Donald Trump himself, of course. And then we talk about the PayPal mafia. I think they are also big. Now, who are the losers? One is, of course, the Democratic Party. But my question is this: that is it really that bad of a thing for the Democratic Party to lose this big? Because now they have to, for example, I guess, hopefully, people like Nancy Pelosi and Barack Obama, can they be just out of the way now? Can they really, leave?
That is what should happen.
Yeah.
And that is what I would hope would happen, because, I've got no history of hostility to the Democratic Party. Once upon a time, not so long ago, it was the party in the United States that I tended to favor. So one would like to think that they would use this time, the next 4 years, to carry out a proper reorganization, get rid of all of these people from the past, Pelosi and Schumer, indeed, all of them, reconnect with their grassroots, reconnect with their working class, their old working class base, rethink their policies, rethink their political rhetoric, and at the same time capitalize on the mistakes that the Trump administration is going to make, and probably the deteriorating economic situation, which I suspect we're also going to see. So actually, they're not badly positioned. I mean, we talk about how they lost and lost badly. It's true Trump won the popular vote, but not by a huge margin. The House of Representatives, the Republicans won back the House of Representatives. But again, it's almost evenly balanced. They are, in theory, in a strong position to come back. And one would like to think that they would. But, I mean, in order for that to happen, at least in a positive way, there would need to be a fundamental rethink in the Democratic Party and a reorganization and a replacement of the leadership. And after that, I have to say, at the moment, I don't see much evidence. My sense is, on the contrary, that they seem to be closing ranks around the existing leaders, even as they blame each other for what has been frankly, a disastrous presidency and a very, very badly managed election campaign.
Yeah, I mean, Harris, I mean, the campaign is in debt. How could she burn so much money, right? Apparently, she
Yeah.
raised lots of money, 1 billion or something in a very, very short period
Yeah.
of time. But she burned through them all, and now they are still in
Yeah.
debt, like a 20 million or something. How could she do
Yeah.
that? I just find that's absolutely stunning.
Yeah. Well, it demonstrates that they pulled all the stops. I mean, they did everything they possibly could to turn an election round, which I suspect they sensed quite a few weeks ago was slipping out of their hands. The fact is, they had a candidate who had not developed proper themes and ideas that she could take forward and present to the American people and which they would be interested in. She gave no reason to the American people, for the American people to think that she was really someone who was going to deal with their problems and make their lives better. And instead, we got all kinds of nonsense about how she was the candidate of joy and how her opponents were weird, when in fact, most of her own people, a lot of their own people, also look pretty weird as well. So, I mean, this is why, I mean, it was very badly run, because ultimately the Democrats weren't presenting enough people in the US with a reason to vote for them.
Yeah. Yeah, they seems like every segment that they should get some support, they somehow manage to upset. They upset the
Yeah.
Muslim population, right? And then I think they also upset many of the young people by,
Yeah.
I think the Gaza problem, but also they're going to ban TikTok. I think they upset young
Mm.
people.
Uh,
And the women, I think actually more and more women are not happy with the fact that the Democrats
no.
got a lot of opportunity to codify Roe v. Wade, but they don't. They're always saying,
Mm.
okay, we support your right to choose, but they don't really put them into action. So more and more people are realizing that. So you see every segment that they are upsetting
Yeah.
people one way or another.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, because their approach to politics is very manipulative, and
Mhm.
that can work up to a certain point. But beyond a certain point, people get wise to it and cynical about it, and they've been manipulative in several elections, and this was the election where it finally caught up with them.
And speaking of which, I think the real big loser in this election is the mainstream media.
Mm.
I think the last one, the 2021, the mainstream media still played a role and helped Biden to get elected.
Mm.
But this time around, it doesn't seem to work. Is that your impression too?
Absolutely. And I think one of the major reasons for that is that the media went so overboard in
Mhm.
supporting Harris and before that in supporting Biden,
Mhm.
that it was telling Americans, again, we're not talking about every American. Some people still believe what they hear and read on the media, but enough Americans was telling them things that those people could see were simply not true. That the economy was doing well, that in fact, that it was booming, when people were aware of the fact that, on the contrary, their living standards was declining. That Biden was on top of his game and was this master of all he surveyed, when everybody could see, on the contrary, that he was experiencing a cognitive decline, that Kamala Harris was this superlative candidate, and that Donald Trump was Hitler. I mean, and it's a point which, by the way, somebody made recently. I can't remember who it was, but it was here in Britain. Is that the thing to understand is that the Europeans have a very limited knowledge of Donald Trump. But in America itself, he's been around for a very long time, on television programs. He's been a person that people have known a lot. He's been a sort of permanent presence in the American media space, and people know him quite well. So calling him a Russian agent, a fascist, a Hitler, and all of that, ultimately, they were talking about someone that people knew sufficiently well to know that it
Mhm.
just wasn't so. So you can't go on doing this day after day after
Mhm.
day without it in the end having a critical effect on your credibility. And I think it's again caught up with them. I mean,
Yeah.
they've had a good run for their money. They've been playing this for a while, but I think this election was again the election where people simply stopped listening and switched
Mhm.
off.
And a bigger problem I think the mainstream media has is this: the whole idea for the media is is because let's think about in the beginning when newspapers started is because okay, we live far away from Washington and we don't know what's going on there, so you need newspaper and then later television to tell us what's going on. But nowadays with the social media, with all kinds of ways, I find like this middleman, this media kind of like a middleman is less important, right? Eventually, I wonder whether they're going to be totally replaced by just social media, independent media. Do you think that's the long-term trend?
Yes, I do actually, and of course, I speak from a self-interested position. But I think the media world that existed, say, 20, 30 years ago, big newspapers and big television
Mhm.
channel, I think that is becoming completely anachronistic. I think it's exactly what you say. I think people are able to understand or follow the events in Washington and in politics generally, with a degree of closeness that has
Mhm.
never existed at any time before. And they don't need it to be mediated and explained to them in the same way that it
Yeah.
used to be. And I think that that model, that media model, is past. In fact, what we've seen over the last couple of years is an attempt to sustain that model, basically by trying to police the social media space in a way that in the end has not been successful. In fact, if anything, it's been counterproductive.
Yeah, and speaking of that, do you think of this government efficiency department or however you call it that's
Yeah.
set up by Donald Trump and now led by Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, do you think it would do much? I mean, what are your impression about that that part?
I get it. I get it explained. I get it set here out my personal views about this, and I should say that I don't know Elon Musk, and I don't
Mhm.
know Vivek Ramaswamy, but I have been on programs with them, so I've have some contact with. I have quite a high opinion of them in some respects, but my own view is that this thing, what it really is there to do, is to purge Donald Trump's enemies in Washington. This is what this is all about. You carry out a root and branch liquidation of everybody who's been horrible to Donald Trump in the past. You pick off all sorts of other people who've been problematic for Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy and people like that, and you call it an efficiency drive. I think that is what this is all about.
And by the way, the Wall Street Journal, I just read that saying that if now they are recruiting people, this
Yeah,
department, whatever you call it,
yeah.
uh, and the way to apply jobs with them is you first of all you need to have an X account, and
Mm,
then you actually do need to, in order for you to submit your resume to the account of this Department of Government Efficiency, they have their own account on X. You actually need to do the paid subscriber for that because
mm,
otherwise you can't communicate. You can't really send your resume to them. So before you do anything, in order just to apply a job, you actually need to at least pay $8 to become this account on X, the Department of Efficiency, their I guess a VIP subscriber or something. I find
mm.
that's just to me that's bad taste. You know, why are you doing that? Because that money goes to X. It doesn't goes to this
Oh
department.
yeah,
So
absolutely. As a
why?
as
I
a
don't.
as I said, if you think that this has all been done for idealistic purposes, that there is really some grand objective here to cut the American government down to size, I'm afraid people are going to be disappointed. As I said, this looks like uh, doing two things: to make Elon Musk even richer, to strengthen Twitter even further, Twitter X even further, and at the same time, as I said, to purge Washington of as many of Donald Trump's enemies and Elon Musk's enemies and Vivek Ramaswamy's enemies. Not that I think Vivek has many enemies in Washington, but people of that kind, to purge the enemies of the MAGA movement as efficiently and as straightforwardly as possible. And I think this is all that this is about, actually. I think I mean, I am sure if we had Elon Musk here and it was a completely confidential discussion, he would deny that. I mean, people have a great ability to believe their own words, but ultimately, this is what this is going to try to do. I speak now as somebody who's worked in governments, and I've seen how these efficiency drives actually work and what they are really intended to do. And I've no reason to doubt that this is exactly what I have said it is.
You see, I see it as some kind of, because first of all, it's outside government. It's not really within the government, even though it's called department of something, but it's not. No. I myself was a consultant before, and I feel like this department is supposedly giving suggestions and ideas to, I guess, advice to Donald Trump. It does give Donald Trump some flexibility for doing certain things. He could blame on them, now I have to cut this and cut that, they are the one who recommended me. I do think that's probably part of the purpose as well, from Donald Trump's perspective.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It gives him wonderful cover as well. If you think he's got all of the people, he's putting all the people that he can. Of course, we'll see how successful he is. He's still got the Senate to think about, but he's putting all the people that he can in very important positions. He's got Tulsi Gabbard in charge of the intelligence community, and Radcliffe in charge of the CIA. Remember how much trouble he had with the intelligence community before? He's trying to put Gats in at Injustice. He's putting his own lawyers, giving them his own personal lawyers jobs within the Justice Department. He's doing all of these things. He's putting Hexus in charge at the Department of Defense. These are not administrators. I mean, even Tulsi Gabbard, who I have high regard for, by the way, is no administrator. She's got no background in intelligence. Their function, as far as Trump is concerned, is to remove people, to carry out his desire to fire the various people who previously, in his previous administration, made his life impossible. Now, one shouldn't be overly critical, because what happened in the first administration was terrible. It was the bureaucracy conspiring against the president. It is a complete inversion of the constitutional principle upon which the American government is created, that they serve the president. They don't try and control him. So you can argue, in fact, I would argue, that to some extent what Trump is trying to do is to bring the bureaucracy back under political control. But of course, in immediate terms, what that means, since he is the president, is it means bringing it under his personal control. So, I mean, there's always those two things to remember.
Something lighter. Now, I sent you the link to Li Ziqi's channel, which I don't know if you get the chance to see it. So that is a big discussion in China right now, because Li Ziqi is talking about social media. She is a big influencer, both inside and outside China. On YouTube, I think she has 20 million subscribers. But that happened, the main thing she does is cooking and crafting, those sort of thing. And it's very Chinese. So it's a Chinese culture thing. So it has nothing to do with politics or anything. It's not even much a discussion of anything. It just you see her doing things, okay, making beautiful things, okay, arrangement, and she also doing a lot of growing food herself and stuff like that. So what's so special about this is that she did that. Her videos are very popular both inside and outside China. But then 3 years ago, she stopped making these videos. And then until recently, like maybe a week ago, she started posting again. What happened was during those 3 years, so she had a big fight with her management company, with her company, the company that saw her potential when she started making those videos. And then there's a company saw the potential, but then they almost like cheated her to get into a deal that they got majority 51% of the control, and she got 49%. And subsequently, they had a lot of disagreement of different kind of like her merchandise and stuff like that. So eventually she got really upset about the whole thing, and she stopped making it. She just wanted to sort these things out. So finally they sort things out, it seems like, and then now she's back online and she's posting again. The significant about this case is because it's a landmark case for social media, self-media people to get into these kind of a big argument with this management company. Now, social media personalities, and we are all in there ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And so lots of people commenting on is that in the future, maybe these kind of cases will be more and more common because social media will gradually probably take over the legacy media, right? And so this kind of a dispute probably will be more common. That's why people look at this case very closely. So what is your view on that in terms of...
I completely agree. I mean, I think this is actually, I mean, I've just come to a production agreement as well with, so just to say, and I've had some of the same concerns that, this program, this person has experienced. So I absolutely think that's right. And once upon a time, long ago, back in the 80s, I used to work in, believe it or not, the music industry. I mean, the rock music industry. This is despite the fact that I don't actually have much interest in rock music, but I did. And, I was involved in all kinds of cases at that time, including an important case involving Bob Marley, who just died, but had been tricked in 1969 to sign away 10 years of his recordings for £50,000, which even in 1969 was not a huge amount of money. And of course, from 69 to 79 was when he produced most of his greatest hits. And there was a huge battle about that, which I'm not going to discuss now. But anyway, so I am aware of this. And the fact that we are getting into this situation is a sign that social media is becoming a business. It's becoming a place where, so whereas before it was, content, it was creators, people like us, YouTube, with the emphasis being on the you, I'm afraid we're starting to see corporations and all the things that come with that move in, which is a sign of an industry that is maturing. And I'm afraid that is the reality. And I'm afraid it follows as night follows day. And it is indeed proof that legacy media, as we have known, it is dying.
Yeah. And there is always this conflict, right? That the production company, the management company, they always want to make money, right? There is always, that's their highest priority. Whereas the content creators always want creativities, they want the freedom to create stuff. And it seems like sooner or later, there will be some kind of a conflict there. It's very often that kind of things happens, right?
Absolutely. The tension is always going to be there between the corporate interest and the creative interest, and I'm afraid that has existed ever since capitalism began. It is intrinsic. It is intrinsic to the system. So I mean, we're going to see it. I mean, obviously we're going to see it, and there will be that tension. And many people who go into social media, or who have been in social media and who find themselves captured by this, are going to feel very angry and very betrayed and very exploited, and with good cause, by the way.
Yeah. Well, it's exciting to see that. We'll see, of course, the more thing
Yeah,
will happen, in this area.
yeah,
So, okay.
yes.
All right. All right. That's all I have for now. So thank you so much. And have a
Yeah,
good trip to Hungary.
okay. Speak soon. Right, bye.
Bye.